Welcome to the workshop, Illusions of Knowing, Misperception in the Instructional Environment. I am your host, Jennifer Jones. Here are some of the items you should be able to accomplish as a result of participating in today's workshop.
Second one, request. Fresco 1, on able squawk 0224.
Fresco 2, velocity wingman.
Roll 1, depart tank setting 090, then it's going to maintain 8,000 vectors per second. Final
Holy shit, dude.
Right. Fresco 2, positive. 8,000 for roll 1. Fresco 2, 1, Victor.
Stand by. Fresco 2 is
proceed direct
disoriented. Okay, get on the round dials and just straighten yourself out. I'm level at 8,000, heading 300.
Fresco 1, that's squawk 0224, reports bugs. Fresco.
Holy shit. 2, confirm you're on the round dial. Fresco 2 is
Roll 1,
heading
verifiable.
330.
As just seen, pilots know well the power that misperception can hold in the flight environment. It can cause us to inaccurately orient ourselves to our surrounding environment. As you know, remaining properly oriented becomes more difficult within the complex and rapidly changing flight environment, especially when multiple sensory inputs begin to conflict and lead to visual and other illusions. Because of this, pilots must train to remain aware of and overcome many different types of perceptual illusions. They must learn to look to and to trust their instruments to tell them the truth of what is really happening. But I suspect that none of this is news to you. What may be new, however, is the idea that something similar occurs in the instructional environment. Perceptual illusions, also known as illusions of knowledge, commonly occur during learning situations. And both students and instructors can fall prey to these misperceptions. Misperceptions or learning illusions cause learners and instructors to inaccurately gauge a student's place in the overall learning experience. Just as what a pilot sees or perceives in the flight environment cannot always be trusted, what instructors and students see or perceive in the learning environment cannot always be trusted. Our perceptions do not always tell the full story of whether learning is occurring. Neither can they be trusted to tell us whether the learning will endure to transfer to the operational environment, ready to be accessed when it is most needed. These illusions of knowledge often relate to how students and instructors perceive various learning strategies. Some strategies feel especially difficult to students. They struggle but fail to see immediate positive results from the experience. Because of this, they perceive they are not learning. They then tend to avoid these difficult approaches, gravitating instead towards study strategies and instructional methods that feel good and quickly provide a sense of learning and improvement. Instructors fall prey to similar misperceptions. They believe they can shorten the proverbial learning curve by using approaches that learners like, those that feel easy and appear to produce learning and results more quickly. These strategies often appear to work in the short term, and instructors see what they believe is rapid improvement in a student's knowledge and skills, whether through high exam scores or rapidly improving performance in a series of sim events. However, the real evidence of learning is that which endures over time. What happens once a learner leaves your course and transitions into the operational world? After a period of time, will the strategies that appear to work quickly to build knowledge and skill prove to have a lasting effect? Will learners be able to retrieve information or proficiently perform a skill at a critical moment? If we cannot trust what we see and feel in the learning environment, how are we to gauge which experiences are effective and create a lasting impact? To determine whether learning is really occurring and whether our instructional strategies prove effective, we need to look to instruments of scientific research. Instead of relying on our perceptions to answer this question, we need to check our instruments to see what is really happening. For example, research shows us that many strategies perceived as difficult or as slowing down learning actually produce stronger, more enduring learning. Psychologists Elizabeth and Robert Bork label these strategies as desirable difficulties. One such study compared massed and interleaved practice techniques. Massed practice presents content, problems, or practice in a series close together in time, either in a single long session, like a study cram session, or in multiple sessions, separated only by short periods. This approach is based on the belief that, through condensed practice, we can burn knowledge and skills into memory. In contrast, interleaved practice mixes two or more related concepts or skills. Instead of focusing on only one concept or skill at a time, the learning experience alternates between the topics. In this study, researchers divided college students into two groups and taught them to calculate the volume of four geometric solids not commonly used: wedge, spheroid, spherical cone, and half cone. One group then practiced problems using a massed approach. For example, they completed 4 problems to calculate the volume of a wedge before moving on to complete 4 problems to calculate the volume of a spheroid, and so on. In contrast, the second group took an interleaved approach, calculating the volume for all 4 types of solids in a random mixed order. During the practice session, students using massed practice performed better, averaging 89% correct responses, while the group using interleave practice only answered 60% of the problems correctly. There is our short-term evidence of learning, right? However, when researchers tested students a week later, those in the massed practice group only averaged 20% correct responses, while the interleave group averaged 63%. Not only did the interleave group outperform the massed group, their performance improved over the previous test, rising from 60% accuracy to 63%. In contrast, the massed group drastically dropped from 89% to only 20% correct responses. That is 215% higher performance of the interleaved group over the massed group. As you can see, our perceptions of whether learning is occurring may not always be correct. Instead, the instrument of scientific research reveals the reality of the situation. Massed practice that initially appears to produce better results in the short term fails to develop long-term learning. Keep in mind, the lure of these and other learning illusions prove just as strong as the perceptual illusions pilots experience in the cockpit. Even after being provided with evidence of the real long-term results of learning gained the harder way, students in these studies persisted in clinging to their sensory beliefs. Instead of trusting the instruments of scientific research, they insisted that the massed practice was more beneficial, based solely on their perceptions in the moment and the way they felt about the learning experience. Now that we have gained better understanding of the pervasiveness and strength of learning misperceptions, how can we apply this knowledge to aircrew training systems? First, as instructors, we should work to become more aware of our own misperceptions about how people learn. Just as we train to recognize and overcome misperceptions in the cockpit, we must also train to recognize and overcome illusions in the instructional environment. We should develop a habit of looking to our instruments, objective scientific evidence, to reveal the reality of what is happening in the learning environment. The reality we discover about learning should then drive the instructional strategies we implement in aircrew training. Second, we can use this knowledge along with the students' familiarity with perceptual illusions to help them understand that their perceptions of learning experiences cannot always be trusted. We can encourage them to embrace learning that feels harder and slower, particularly when guided by the instruments of science. This may also provide encouragement to students who feel they are just not getting it. Instead, the instruments of science reveal that their frustration may be evidence of the opposite, and their struggle may be serving to grow and develop truer, deeper, and longer enduring learning. So, what is our prime takeaway? We should always gauge our perceptions against instruments to inform us of what is really happening in our environment, whether in the cockpit or the classroom.